One of the biggest names that has talked about sports cards over the past few years has been Gary Vee. He hasn't been as active talking about the topic, but he recently put out a tweet about sports cards, and in this video, that's what we're going to talk about. Thank you for clicking on this video. My name is Adam from Herosforsale. If you enjoy sports card content and hobby analysis, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button. Now let's get into the video. As many of you may know or may have seen over the past few years, if you are into sports card content, one of the biggest names that has talked about sports cards is going to be Gary Vee. Now, he hasn't been as active talking about sports cards, probably for a couple different reasons, because obviously he has VaynerMedia, which is a huge company. That's probably the main reason, so he's super busy, so sports cards aren't always on top of mind for him, but he recently had a tweet that I'm going to read here. He said, "Buying sports cards is so fun because it's a living and breathing market, but it requires seeing things many others don't see. Whether a current athlete or seeing other limited stuff that hasn't popped off yet, I'm enjoying the last few months. It's challenging and fun." So in my opinion, this mindset is one that I have kind of taken on for myself over the past few years. I've been looking into and doing research in areas that I don't think many people really were looking into at the time. I mean, I think the prime example is soccer. I think when I started making content about soccer cards, there maybe was only one or two other accounts. Now we're obviously seeing a ton of other soccer-specific accounts, which I think is great because there's so much different things that go on with soccer. There's so many nuances that, like, somebody like me who I'd say that I watch a lot of Premier League, I watch a lot of Champions League, but there really hasn't been much international competition over the past few years. I'm also into the Bundesliga, but there are people who live and breathe soccer who are definitely more knowledgeable about the sport than I am, but there have been tons of accounts that have kind of grown and become more prominent within the space with soccer cards, but I don't know, I think I was definitely one of the first people to talk about soccer cards and kind of start to learn about them back in 2019. I was buying a ton during that summer of 2019. I've talked about that in previous videos. But, you know, other stuff that I thought, I guess you could say that I saw maybe before other people, where there was the Tiger Woods cards. I made a podcast, and also Serena Williams was another one. I'll get in that in a second. But the Tiger Woods cards, I was talking about those PSA 10 Upper Deck cards when they were like $120, and now they went up pretty significantly, and then they went down and up and down. And I think Gary Vee did a overrated, underrated back a few months ago, and one of them was about the Tiger Woods cards. I don't remember if it was specifically about golf cards, but I think my opinion back then was that it was overrated because of the price that it was, because I thought it was a little bit too expensive, but it was underrated in the long term because Tiger is one of the GOATs. Now, obviously, he had that crazy car crash, and, you know, luckily, from what I've seen, he's recovering, but he's obviously not playing in the Masters, which is this weekend, depending on when you're watching this video. But, you know, the Tiger Woods cards, there was Serena Williams cards. I mean, I didn't think that tennis could do what it did, because I think one of the things that when I was looking into tennis cards and when I was talking to people about tennis cards, the main thing was that you have to look at the crossover between people who like cards and people who like tennis. Like, is that crossover going to be enough? Now, we obviously had seen a pretty significant increase in some of those Serena Williams cards. Like, I think I was buying them for like 50 cents a piece, and I think I sold a bunch of them for around like $75. Not 75 cents, $75. So, and that was on Check Out My Cards, a website that I use pretty frequently when I'm buying and selling kind of low-end cards like that, which, you know, at the time it was low-end. Now it's not really low-end. I think there's other stuff that, you know, you want to take more of a, I guess you could say, marketing mindset, because there are reasons why cards are going to go up and down, and I think that just on the field play, I think it's the same when you look at just the sports card market in general. Like, I know a lot of people talk about the junk wax era and kind of sports cards back in the day, maybe early 2000s, maybe late 90s, but you look at those specific time periods, and there really wasn't, eBay wasn't around. Like, the internet obviously is, you know, it's new if you're comparing it in the big picture, but obviously not new if you have been born with it. But eBay wasn't always around, so getting comps and eBay, and even when eBay started kind of getting developed, the sports card market wasn't what it was on eBay. So, like, you look at the just the market in general. You can look up comps of these cards. You can, and before in the 90s and then even maybe in the 2000s, really the only comparison pricing that you could do was if you looked at the Beckett magazine or you looked at like Beckett's website or you looked at some other websites, but there wasn't the volume of how many cards were being sold really wasn't there compared to where it is now. And seeing things, I think, can have a bunch of different ways. I think seeing things, basically, in my opinion, he's pretty much just saying, like, you should be looking in the areas that you're interested in. Because if you look in the areas that you're interested in, that means you're going to be doing the research in something that you like, and you're going to spend more time doing that research. Like, one thing that I do get nervous sometimes when people are getting into sports cards is if they don't really like sports or they don't really like sports cards, if they're just in it for money, like they're going to do research, and like I've said this in the past, you could have thrown a golf ball. Making money in sports cards over the past 2-3 years has been like throwing a golf ball into the Grand Canyon. Like basically everything went up in price. So you really could have done very little research back in 2018, 2019, and even the beginning of 2020, and you could have seen 3, 4, 5, 6 x your money, which if you listen to anybody who's been in this hobby longer than me, if you listen to people who have been in here since, I've been in since 2018, but if you listen to anybody from previous years, they're going to tell you that the 10 to 20% gains year over year were really what they were looking for back in the day. So these 10, 20x gains, not 20, 10, 20%, these 10, 20x gains are pretty crazy. And I think what we're seeing now, and we've seen some kind of increases and decreases in cards, and I think what we're seeing is that a lot of people are getting into cards, and I'm wondering, I've been thinking about this the past couple days and weeks, maybe probably like last week or so, is like what's going to be the cap of how many people are going to get into sports cards? Because when I was getting into sports cards and doing content, my thoughts and opinions on these were always like, there's going to be some sort of Pokemon Go type moment where everybody who used to be into sports cards, like everybody who used to be into Pokemon, gets back into it. And I think we're seeing sort of a resurgence. And I think, well, with sports cards, I think there's two kind of groups of people. There's people who are teenagers who were never really into sports cards because when they were in the 2000s, sports cards weren't, they had kind of gone through that junk wax era and nobody was really into them. I think LeBron coming into the league kind of brought a certain sector of people back into it. But then you're also seeing people who did sports cards and who were buying and selling like as a kid, or even just buying and selling packs or opening boxes, stuff like that. So I think I'm interested to see kind of where the cap is of how many more people can get into sports cards. Because this is where, I expected that this was where we would be in a few years from now. So I didn't expect that this crazy, like I said, 10x gain in a lot of cards was going to happen right now. I kind of was looking at it more long term. So, I think maybe one of the reasons you're seeing kind of some of these increases and decreases in cards is because people are looking at it and they're saying, well, how many more people are going to get into this that want to buy this card? So maybe they're looking at it and saying, or it's just people that like bought cards in 2019 and they're saying, well, I made 10x, so I'm going to sell this card, even though, and I think it's kind of with like the Jordan card, like a couple weeks ago, or in January, there was two Jordan cards that sold for $700, and I think it was like $720,000. I think two of them sold, and now they're kind of floating around that $500,000 range. I think a couple of them sold for a little bit less than $500,000, and I think one of the main reasons is just because people are looking at how many more people can get in. Now, I think with the high-end market, there's more people who can get in, because with the high-end market, it's more people who have wealth and money, where the lower-end market, I think we're sort of looking at, I don't know if it's a leveling off point of how many like average Americans can get into this, and I think one of the main ways will have to be overseas people getting into cards, and that's going to be, which I know it's becoming more and more popular overseas, but I think that's going to be really the next step we see, where we potentially could see another pretty significant increase in the market. But I think overall within the United States, and maybe even you could say Canada or Mexico, but within North America at least, I think what we're seeing is that there's been so many articles written about sports cards that it's like, and this is what I expected to happen, but I didn't expect it all kind of, like there's been hundreds of articles written about sports cards over just in like the last half of 2020 and then into 2021 so far. There's been more sports card articles written about than there had been maybe in the last decade, like, when the Mike Trout card sold. And I think that's a kind of a good gauging point, is like when the Mike Trout card sold, there weren't like ESPN didn't write an article about when that back in 2018 that original Mike Trout sale for $400,000. ESPN wasn't writing about that card, but when the card sells for $4.1 million, ESPN's going to write an article about it. And it's the same with like that Mickey Mantle card, like the Mickey Mantle card that sold for 2.8. There was some articles, and I'm sure maybe ESPN even wrote an article, but like you weren't having like Forbes or like Yahoo Finance or CNBC or even like outlets that aren't in sports writing about cards. So I think that's one of the things where I look at it and say there's so much opportunity now that you have to kind of look at it and say, well, what am I interested in? Because now you do have to be a little bit careful when you're getting in to buy sports cards. Because I mean, one card that I was doing some research the other day, and a card that I saw that decreased pretty significantly was the Ja Morant Optic PSA 10. I think it was around 300 at the start of the season, and I was looking at the 3-month chart, and now it's around like 150, 160. So like, I think people are starting to get smarter when it comes to knowing about the population of PSA 10s versus the price, and they're saying, well, why would I want to buy a second or third tier card that has like, because that's an Optic is probably second tier, it's probably below, it's in the Prism select conversation, but it's not Prism at all. And even Prism, there's probably even more. There's probably in the $12,000 to $15,000 for 12 to 15 PSA 10 range for that Ja Morant card. But like, why somebody looks at that card and say, why would I want to spend $300 on that card when there's 5,000 of them when I could spend it on something else? And I don't have an exact example, but I think that's why we're seeing kind of a decrease, is just that people are selling cards because they made a significant amount of money and they're okay selling the cards. So I think overall that's kind of what I think Gary Vee was saying in that tweet, that like the market is changing so quickly, and all of you just really got to get into cards and subjects that you're interested in, because if you're not going to put in the work to do it, and you're just not going to find the little nugget of information that's going to say, oh, this is probably underpriced, I'm going to buy it. Or, because I think underpriced exactly is sort of it's a broad term in my opinion, but I've used underpriced when I'm comparing products, I've used underpriced comparing players. But I think, like I've said also, just make sure if you're following people's content and they talk about underpriced cards, just do your own research and make sure that you are learning that in some cases underpriced means just cheap. Cheap and underpriced, I think, are like people are they're just changing those words out. And also, cheap and undervalued does not equal the same thing. Undervalued means that there's some value that you could potentially get. Cheap is just cheap because for whatever reason the person's a sixth man or a seventh man off the bench, and maybe they haven't had the opportunity or whatever. But like, I just think that you need to be careful when you're getting in, because there are pitfalls that you can get into because it's so exciting. Also, that's kind of this is the last point. It's very exciting to get into sports cards and buying. Like, buying is a lot of fun, and you can get caught up buying a bunch of things that you maybe don't necessarily like because you saw someone talking about it, or you saw someone's highlight dunk or something along those lines. But just be careful when you're getting in. So that's all I've got for today's video. I want to thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next one.